In many ways, the film Edward II was Derek's cinematic challenge to the homophobia and authoritarianism of the Thatcher Major era. It was his way of using film to make a broader political point. And of course, the implicit homophobia in Edward II was not irrelevant to the very real-life homophobia that existed in Britain in the late 80s and early 90s.
It's all about homosexuality, all his art, all his film, all his writings. He wouldn't be who he was without it, and that's what made him into something rather special.
Derek was a great myth-maker of his own. He'd back sort of design in his life. So I don't think initially the gayness was nearly such an issue. He was much more interested in just doing things. And he was gay, he made gay movies, in a sense, in that he liked to have nice young men around working with them in front of the camera and so on like that. And he worked well, and it was relaxed and jolly. But I think that whole sort of quite heavy political side of it was actually imposed on his life from later, when he really, particularly after, of course, when he got HIV and became extremely politicised by that.
His illness and his the question of his mortality, on top of the question of his sexuality, was his material.
Well, I think he always had to fight for himself, fight for his work. And I think if you're fighting for your work on the kind of level that he was, the kind of ground he was standing on, that would include his sexuality. But I think he was standing up for so much more than that. I mean, apart from anything else, a way of making films, a way of putting a narrative together on the screen or working against narrative on the screen.
Derek's films were essentially about Derek, which is something he told me very late on, very close to his death. He said that with Blue, he said, I finally done what I've always had to do surreptitiously, that is make a film about myself. And he says in the other films I had to disguise myself as Caravaggio, I had to disguise myself as Sebastian. So they're all films where Derek is essentially the central player. So they're films about him rather than views on homosexuality. I mean, I think he was much more interesting, complex a person than just merely somebody who could say that labels through his sexuality.
You have to have deep, strong passions inside you on some level or the other if you're going to be a successful artist. That if there is no struggle inside you, whatever the struggle may be for your sexuality, for your class, for politics, to, against poverty, to get your pains to paint, unless you have that burning desire, it's difficult to be an artist.
One of the important things about St. Derek's films, and I think people underestimate this a bit, is his Englishness and indeed his great patriotism, and how unusually for this country, all the arts that he practiced came together in each of the films, including the gardening.
He was in his own movie in some respects, in a way. It sounds daft, but I mean, it looked like you went in there and part of it was you thought, oh, this looks like a Derek Jarman film. And of course, Derek's there in the middle of it all, dead, and with candles and gold robes and the whole thing. Funny and sad and hilarious at the same time. I mean, it was very much the man.
He was always open to new ideas, even if he had a very fixed view about his particular film and the way it would go. Now, I remember there were certain elements of the scenes we shot for Edward II where we departed quite radically from what was originally intended, and I think that gave the film an incredible spontaneity. It also gave it a sense of, it was a living thing.
I was going to be in The Tempest. He had this idea. I mean, how he's always thought after thought after thought, incredibly speedy thought person. I was going to play. There was one stage where I was going to play Ariel. No, I wasn't. I was going to play a reporter who went to Ibiza to see Terry Thomas, who was Ariel in a previous incarnation. And so actually, when we finished filming, I did actually go to Mallorca and meet Terry Thomas, take him and his wife some wine, present the idea to him, and it was all going to go, and then Derek changed his mind and decided not to do it. But and then there was another idea, which was I was going to be on Concorde with Terry Thomas, flying across the Atlantic, and I'd be interviewing him because I'd tracked him down. Bizarre.
He'd always say, oh, well, you know what I mean. And, well, most of the time I did, but I think if it looked too garish or it was just too much, he'd say. But otherwise, he left me pretty much to my own devices, I think. Or if he was directing me, he was directing me in a way which I didn't notice.
I don't think of him as an imposing filmmaker. I think he had his visual imagination, but I think within that, he probably allowed, certainly, for example, the people in the film, who would be a mixture of actors and friends, I think he allowed them a lot of free rein. Once he'd made his decision to go with whoever it was, I think there was a lot of trust that they would get it right. You don't, unlike a lot of filmmakers, you don't feel, I never think of performers stamped with Derek Jarman's personality.
It's always good to be trusted, if you're an actor. It's horrid when you're not trusted. I've experienced that, when the director doesn't believe that you can do it. He just believes that you can do things. And I love it when I work with a director who just says, go.
He was not a perfectionist in the sense, he liked to work quickly, and he liked the kind of happenstance of working with a group of people and somebody saying, let's try that. Oh yes, let's try that. And the excitement of kind of putting things together in a quick, sometimes haphazard fashion and moving on. I don't think it was important. I don't think he was somebody who wanted to have a perfectly finished object. It was much more important to do something, to try a particular combination of things or whatever, and then to try them in another combination, and then to try something else, and to keep moving.
It was like to eat, chitty-chat, gossip, inspire ideas. Extraordinary. Like the things, the Amaretti papers at the end of the garden. He went, oh, so I'm going to get some biscuits from the Italian down the road. So I got some biscuits, and we started doing the papers, lighting up the papers with a cup of tea in tea time. He went, of course, that's how we can do it at the end of the film. And that's what he took. He just went, oh, great, I've had a cup of tea, these papers. Oh, I used to do that when I was young. Hang on a moment, I can finish the film with this. Another sequence to shoot.
Fear is a terrible enemy of creativity, doing anything, isn't it? Fear and sloth and excuses. You would never make an excuse for getting something wrong.
There's one occasion I remember when there was a screening of Peter Greenaway's Z and Two Noughts, and I can't remember why, but for some reason we were both at a preview screening, probably something to do with the British Film Institute, and neither of us liked the film. But as the screening of the film went on and on, I was sitting next to Derek, and he was getting more and more restless, more and more. I knew something was building up. And Peter Greenaway was present to take questions or give a few comments at the end of the film to the audience, which I think included some of the actors. And the film finished, and Peter Greenaway, came under the spotlight to field questions. And Derek just stood up and said, but it's dead, dead, dead. I'll never forget that.
He didn't seek approval of Hollywood, the British film industry, the European film industry. He just didn't care, as long as he made his film.
When Derek discovered that he was ill at that time when so many of his friends were already very ill or had died, and there really was a plague feeling. There were all sorts of very, very frightening laws being either passed or talked about, and there was a very strange air of persecution around. When he found out that he was ill, I would go so far as to say, devastating on one level though it was, I think as an artist, he was elated. I challenge anybody. Well, he's not here, so, but I think he's nodding, you know? I remember this feeling of, well, also it was a fantastic task, this illness. It was like a task, and this death. It was a real piece of work. And he took it on, and he made it into something, just created a thing out of it. I remember, I mean, it was hilarious very often, you know. I think we got about 4 films made off the back of being Derek's last film. You know, it was like, talk about spin.
In the difficult, dark days of the 80s in particular, and under Thatcher, the sort of gay, what he called the suffragette movement, because just as women gained the vote, in effect, we were looking for our full political equality, that those who spokespeople for the gay movement seemed to split into 2. There were those who were actually on the streets and involved in grassroots communitarian politics, and those who were, in my view, willing to stand back and preach from television and newspaper articles and from above, and not get involved and not be directly challenged by debate, and who looked for direct access to those in political power, and who wanted, in a way, to trade communitarian politics for power. Derek was uncompromisingly on the side of the grassroots, communitarian, democratic political struggle.
So when Ian McKellen went to tea with John Major at Downing Street, Derek was apoplectic with rage. You know, he was furious that Ian was prepared to go and sit down with a Tory Prime Minister representing a party that had introduced Section 28, that had stoked the fires and flames of AIDS, panic and hysteria. His view was that, knighthoods and whining and dining by the establishment were all just baubles dangled to try and seduce us, to deflect criticism and dissent, and that he would have nothing to do with it ever.
This was a filmmaker who was very bold and prepared to say what he wanted, and not making any compromises, either politically in his depiction of sexuality or in the way he shot a film. I mean, he did what he wanted. So I think that's also something which has to be put into the equation.